Hi everyone, I'm Jodi Barrows with The Square and a Square. Welcome to our 4 o'clock story time. We have been spending the last few weeks reading the series that is the Thread series. There's 3 books currently in the series, and I'm working on the 4th one. The first one is Threads of Change, the second one is Threads of Home, and the one that we are just about to finish is Threads of Courage. It starts out in 1856 for the first 2 books, and it's about the Malay women, a family of women that know that they're caught in a detrimental time in the South right before the Civil War, and they leave their home in Louisiana and go west, winding up in Fort Worth, Texas. Now, all of this story is based off of the true history of my family. So if you read about a fire or a snake or a tornado or whatever it is, you know that that is something that happened to someone in our family. And after growing up with all these great stories, I decided that it was time to mix them together with more history of the day and my imagination to create this family of women that we call the Malay women. Now, we are almost to the end of our book. We'll be starting on chapter 26 today on page 184. But before I get started reading, I want you to notice the 2 quilts behind me. The red, black, and light colored one is called Starflower, and you can get the patterns and the fabrics and the kits from our website, squareandasquare.com. You can also purchase our novels at the squareandasquare.com website. And then the green one is one of our brand new ones. The fabric is from our Transcontinental Railroad fabric collection, and it is called Disappearing Star Green. So now that you know about those quilts, let's get started with our story. Chapter 26, page 184. Emma couldn't sleep again, so she rose and dressed for the day and then tiptoed out of her room. She laced up her black boots by the light of the kitchen lamp. Might as well go start the kitchen routine at the restaurant, she quietly said out loud as she took a deep breath and yawned. She knew she needed to prepare a new batch of cinnamon rolls. The day before, the cowboys had wiped her clean out of everything. When she reached the kitchen, she decided to start the bread first and reached into her flour bin to scoop the white powder into her bowl. A letter dropped to the floor. She picked it up, having no clue who put it there or how. She opened the note and read, "Good morning, Emma. I sure enjoyed your dessert and your conversation this afternoon. I'll be back in to pick up the horse at Luther's in a day or so. If the weather holds, I'll be back in for church on Sunday. I haven't heard Parker preach in a good while, and I need to see that new baby girl, Aubrey Faith. I hope you have a good day. Your friend, Chet." Emma was very surprised to receive a note from the cowboy. She then noticed his note had brought a huge smile to her face. When did he write this note, she wondered. How did he manage to place it here where I would find it later? The door pushed open, and she saw Luther arrive for breakfast. "Hi, Miss Emma. I saw the light on early and came on in. If you aren't ready for my breakfast, just give me a cup of coffee, and I'll wait over here. Miss Liz let me borrow a paper last evening." Luther pulled out a chair to sit and read. "You're happy this early morn." Emma tried to smile smaller, but she couldn't. She slipped the note in her apron pocket. "Sure, I'll get your coffee. Let me get this bread rising, and then I'll get your breakfast." She kneaded the bread and thought about Luther reading. She really didn't know much about his past or whether or not he had ever been a slave. Bringing his breakfast over to him, Emma asked if she could sit with him. She always asked, and he always said, "Yes, for a few minutes, ma'am." "Can I ask you a few questions about yourself?" she asked that day, not knowing how he would respond. He looked up in surprise. "I suppose." "How or when did you learn to read?" "The mistress at the plantation wanted us to learn to read the Bible. She had a little broken-down, cold cabin that served as our church. She gave us Sunday as a day of rest. She cared for our illnesses when we were under the weather. She had a mammy that she had taught to read at the big house, and that woman taught us little ones to read on Sunday." "You were born on a plantation?" Emma sat thinking about Luther's life and how lonely it could be. "Yes, I lived in Mississippi." "I'll get you some more coffee," she said as she watched him drink to the bottom of the cup. "How were you freed?" she asked as she poured the hot liquid into his cup. Luther took a sip. "My name is Wheeler. I worked as a young boy in the repairs at the plantation wagon house. I was a good smithy and wheelmaster, so my given name became Luther Wheeler. He leaned back in the chair, thinking of the years gone by. One day the master's little boy came playing around where we were building new wheels. We warned him that it was dangerous and he should move along. He was climbing above us, lost his footing, and fell into the area where we were working around a forge. When he fell, he knocked a pot of molten metal on some other slaves who were working. Instead of helping my coworkers, I caught him as he fell. My friends were badly burned, and one died from his injuries. Because I saved the young master, his mother insisted that I be freed as payment for saving his life. Her insistence that I be freed brought her much grief, but I was freed. Emma thought he looked sad. You saved the boy? Being given your freedom was good, right? Not really. Everything I loved and needed was there. My home, my family. Then I had to leave and make it on my own in a world that didn't accept a free black man. Emma sat thinking about what he had said. I have never thought about slavery in this way. She rose to get his lunch that she packed each morning. Emma, Luther said. She returned with his lunch in a bag. Remember how we talked about God? She nodded, yes. I was in bondage in that plantation, held captive by the only life I knew. When I was given my freedom, I had to trust and go with it. You are held in bondage by your sin and your lack of trust in God. Freedom and a new life is waiting. You just got to go with it. Emma knew that Luther and Pastor Parker were right. She needed to give God a chance and trust in him. Chapter 27. Liz was waiting for the freight wagon to arrive any day. She had placed one of the largest orders ever, anticipating the interruption of supplies or even the non-availability of items. She had taken Tex's words of warning to heart and planned ahead as best she knew how. Liz had even taken John and Blue away from the ranch for the week to help with getting all of her freight and her multiple wagon loads of goods. Liz had been forced to hire some men she didn't know to help with the freight supply wagons. Over the past few months, she'd had very little available labor at her fingertips. Liz wasn't happy using these workmen, but felt she had no other choice. Thomas justified her decision by saying that strangers had pulled her freight to the point where her men picked them up. It really isn't any different doing it this way, he had said. On the last two shipments, Liz had noticed the wagon had extra room. She thought her wagons would be completely full and would have ordered more supplies if she had known. She stopped for a moment, looking at her freight ledger. Confused, Liz flipped to a few pages back and forth. Abby sat in the rocker at the back of the mercantile sewing while Liz worked on her ledgers. She noticed Liz's frustrations and heard her sigh. What is it, Liz? I'm not sure. I can't put my finger on it, but it just doesn't add up. Liz turned another page with additional numbers and notes. Like what? What are you thinking? Abby thought if Liz spoke it, maybe what didn't add up would become more clear to her. I'm behind in my freight bookkeeping. My first mistake, she admitted. Now I can't make sense of it all. You know, she continued, talking to her schoolteacher cousin, I have been ordering more than usual for several months, stockpiling supplies for troubled times. Abby nodded, and she held the sewing in her hand as she gave her full attention to Liz's explanation. First, I had lots of back orders, which would make more room in the wagon's wasted space. My drivers say that the wagons were full, but when they arrived, they had extra space. It just doesn't add up, and it's multiple shipments, not just one mishap or one freight load. Abby tilted her head to the left. What do John and Blue say, or Chet? They haven't been on all the runs because Thomas has been short-handed and it's calving season. Liz stopped to face Abby. With multiple new drivers, I can't get any one story or information from them, but I know something is definitely wrong. I'm not sure I understand. Liz was puzzled. I'm not sure I do either. Just give me your thoughts in a fact statement, Abby stated. Maybe it will help. Liz paused. I'm not getting all that I ordered. She held up one finger. Two. She raised two fingers. The wagons have room for more when they arrive. She paused again, thinking, and raised a third finger. 3. They say the wagon is full and won't ship previously delayed items. And 4th, at some point the driver tells me they're all full. But they aren't full when they get here, Abby asked, trying to be a help. No, Liz stretched out her reply, thinking. John and Chet are gone, now with Blue to get his last big load. The wagons are full with lots of orders. I hope they can shed some light on what has been happening. Emma came around from the other side of the room where she had been doing her own bookwork. She had to separate the egg bill she had received from Liz and deduct it from the flour, sugar, and spices she needed for her restaurant. Because Liz sold so many eggs for Emma, as well as some little chicks, Emma seldom had to put out any money against her bill at the mercantile. Liz, I've got mine completed. Do you want to double check it for me? Emma smiled at Abby as Liz was still in deep thought over her freight wagon dilemma. Hi, Emma. Did you see your letter on the counter? That's 2 this week. Do you have a new pen pal? Abby raised her eyebrow as she teased her sister about the recent letters. Oh, thank you, Emma said as she walked back to look for it without answering her sister. The first letter was a nice, short, one-page note from Chet. Emma had been surprised when she opened and read it. She had read it several times over the last few days. The handwriting on the envelope told her that Chet was also the writer of this one. Slipping it into her apron pocket, Emma bid her sister and Liz goodbye as she quickly returned to her business next door. When she saw that the restaurant was empty, she took a moment to read the note. She reached in an empty tin on her shelf and pulled out the other 2 letters. She took the envelope from her pocket, opened it, slipped out the enclosed letter, and read, Hi, Em. I thought about the chocolate cake again today. I circled the herd of cattle twice. I was so lost in thought. I'm glad you took time to sit with me that day. I have missed your voice and your friendship. Things just go better and look better with you around. Luther got the horse fixed up, and I made it back in quick time the following day. Sorry I didn't have time to come down the street for more of your cooking. Hope you have a really good day. Your friend, Chet. She read the letter over again, pausing at the beginning. Hi, Em. Only Chet and Maddie called her Em. She liked it and read his note again. With anticipation, Emma picked up the new letter she had received that day. It's only been a few days since I received the last letter. A sense of excitement gripped her as she opened it and read his words. Hi, Em. Real sorry I didn't get to see you before I left with Blue and John for the freight wagon pickup. We would have loved to have you pack us some food for the trail, but Lulu did a good job on the food for us. I'm sure you know Liz has a big order of supplies coming in, and she needed 3 drivers, 1 for each wagon. They are to be big loads with these real pretty workhorses pulling them. These horses have the feathering at the ankles like their manes. I remember seeing these horses when we were in Louisiana all those years ago. Was thinking the other day and wondered where all the time went. When we were in those wagons headed west, I thought you were sweet on Ranger Colt and he on you. Then he went on to Birdville to be the sheriff. We don't see him much over the years. Always liked Colt and counted him as my friend. I'm sure you do too. We'll ride 2 days, meet Liz's wagons, tie our horses to the back of them, and head back to Fort Worth. I'm sure we'll be hungry as a pack of wolves. We'll stop in to eat. Make sure you got plenty for us. Your friend, Chet. She thoughtfully traced the last 3 words with her finger. Emma knew pretty much all he had shared, but she enjoyed receiving the letter. She could hear Chet's voice with his cadence on each sentence. She stood and put all 3 letters in the empty tin, replaced down the lid, and slid it to the back of the shelf. She never knew how much she would enjoy a letter from her friend Chet. 3 days had passed, and the freight was due at the mercantile. Liz paced the wooden sidewalk out front and looked in both directions. Cowboys went one way towards Hales Avenue, and school kids walked the other way. No freight wagons yet for her. She didn't know why the loads deliveries made her so on edge. A few miles out of town, a wagon sat parked under a group of oak trees. The sun was shining, the breeze light, and as far as Texas winter days go, it couldn't get much better. A creek was close, and the men watered their horses while they rested and waited. Did Mr. Barton say how much this time? No, he didn't. Just said it was a double load of whiskey and some good bourbon, too. Do we get money this time for the load, or did you trade for whiskey again? We get both. It's a double load. The men talked back and forth, then stood when they saw the 3 wagons coming down the road. Chet motioned to the other 2 freight wagons to pull over and water the horses before they went the last few miles into Fort Worth. John pulled in on one side of Chet, with Blue coming in on the other. The 2 men in the empty wagon looked them over. Those are different drivers, one said to the other. Pay it no mind. Mr. Barton didn't give us any warning on any difference. They pulled in, so must be the same deal. Howdy, the bigger man said, walking a few steps over to Liz's wagons. You got our freight like usual? Chet looked at Blue and John. They both shrugged, not knowing anything. I'm not sure what you mean, sir, Chet replied. Yeah, like always, you know. We're here to pick up the load. What load would that be? Chet asked again. All of this is for Liz at the Mercantile. Yeah, she knows all about it. Got it worked out with our boss. 'Cause well, you know, the nature of the shipment. Who is your boss? Chet asked. Mr. Barton, you know him. He owns most of the businesses and buildings down on Hells Avenue in Fort Worth. Chet nodded. Oh, and the nature of goods is whiskey? Yeah, you got it, Mr. Barton. Didn't want the lady at the Mercantile embarrassed and all. He worked out a special deal with her. John and Blue looked at Chet. All 3 had figured out this deal fairly quickly. Liz would never supply the saloons and gambling halls with these spirits. Chet worked on a plan in his head. He didn't want any trouble, and these guys, knowing they wouldn't be easy to take. Well, you know, Miss Liz is waiting to get her supply in quickly today, and your load is loaded down front at the bottom. It would take too long to do it here. Why don't you take a nap in the warm sunshine? We'll get this unloaded at Liz's and then run those boxes down to you and your boss. You said Mr. Barton, right? The 2 men looked at each other. Well, we would need to get paid and all, the man said, thinking about Chet's offer. No problem. Chet pulled a coin from his vest pocket and flipped it to the man. The man caught the shiny gold coin sparkling in the sunlight. We got whiskey coming too. No problem either, Chet replied, smiling. Liz will make sure you and your boss will get what's coming to you. Okay, then, it's a deal. The man smiled broadly, like he had made the best deal in the world. The other man said to his partner, So we get paid and we don't have to do the work? Yep, the deal maker replied. Now don't forget to show up at the Mercantile. We want to make sure you get the end of the deal. John had to turn away. He was about to laugh out loud. Blue joined in, sealing the deal. Yeah, we'll catch you later. Both men pulled their hats down for a quick afternoon nap. Chet took the teams at a fast pace the rest of the way into town. In front of the Mercantile, he pulled the horses up quickly. You guys hurry in to tell Liz. I'm looking up Sheriff Jackson. You've got to be kidding me, Liz said, her hands on her hips as she listened. Jackson's coming now, she asked. Yeah, Chet's looking for him. Chet saw Jackson coming down the road from the other side of town, the side Barton owned. He jogged up to him and waved him over. Jackson listened intently to the story and looked back to Hells Avenue. Have you looked in the wagon to see if the load is there? Jackson asked. No, not yet. We hurried on into town to tell you and Liz, Chet replied with each step as the 2 marched to the Mercantile. I should have known. Liz paced 3 or 4 steps, then turned around again. Let's take the wagon to the back to unload and get the proof. The men took the wagon around back and before long found the tarp covering the whiskey. Look, Liz pointed. The boxes even have his name on them. That's even better proof, Jackson smiled. You boys are hereby my deputies for the rest of the day. Guard these and arrest the other 2 men when they show up to be paid. I'm going down to pay Barton a visit. Jackson barked out orders, tossing 3 badges to his friends. Liz stood at her front windows until she saw Barton being escorted into the new jail. When he looked towards her, his handsome face contorted in ugly rage. Within the hour, the other two men were marched into the jail by Liz's friends. Jackson came into the mercantile at closing. They aren't saying much, but are denying most of it. The name on his shipment is pretty good evidence against him. If it had your name on them, I would have to let them all walk. I'll hold them overnight. Liz, you need to decide what you want to do about it. I know you don't want money. I can't hang them over this like a stealing livestock, so not much I can do except keep them in jail a few days. Thank you, Liz said. I'll have an answer in the morning. The next morning, Jackson came over to see what Liz had decided. Can you keep them a few days and make them pay a tax or a fine? Can you keep the fine money for the town? We can use it on some community project or something, she paused. I hate that he wanted to give it to charity for the freight in the beginning, and I refused. He got his way. Liz was furious with the thought. She did not want Barton to win. Okay, Liz, we can do that, Jackson agreed. Chapter 28, Spring of 1861. It wasn't long before the political problems the women tried not to talk or think about happened as well as what the whole state or nation expected. In January, South Carolina was the first state to draft the official papers of seceding. In a matter of days, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and finally Texas seceded and formed the Confederate States of America. A meeting in Montgomery, Alabama, bound the states together with a new constitution, much like the Union's, but with greater emphasis on the autonomy of each state. Jefferson Davis was named president until an election could be organized. Liz opened the most current newspaper in the store and read the March 4th, 1861 St. Louis paper. The banner headline read, Lincoln's Inauguration. The new president has no plans to end slavery in the states where it already exists, Liz read out loud to Megan and paused before she read the next line. Megan leaned over her sister's shoulder, trying to get a look for herself, but Lydia, now a year old and walking, squirmed, and Megan couldn't see it. What else does it say? She asked, feeling a little anxiety. Basically, he won't accept the secession papers from the newly formed Confederacy and hopes to resolve the national crisis without warfare. Liz sighed as she set the paper down. I hope so. Oh, I hope so. I have worried and fretted over this. I've tried to give the whole matter to God, but I keep taking it back. What about Fort Sumter in South Carolina? Megan asked as she bounced Lydia and tried to get her to sleep. Lydia was plump and pink, a pretty little girl with big blue eyes and just a short crop of shiny blonde curls. A soft wisp of curl framed her face, giving her the sweetest cherub look. It's a tangled mess as usual. In a previous paper, President Buchanan refused to surrender any Southern forts to the seceding states, so Southern troops seized them. He's leaving office, and Lincoln wasn't quite there yet. One hand doesn't know what the other is doing. So we have Southern troops already? Megan was surprised. She quickly tried to think if Jackson had given her any information on this. She knew he would be quick to join, and she mentally tried to prepare herself for this decision. Yes, I guess so, Liz replied. At Fort Sumter, the Southern troops pushed the Union supply ship back and wouldn't let it resupply the fort. The ship returned to New York with undeliverable goods. General Beauregard demanded the fort to surrender to the South before midnight. Then Liz pulled a poster from under her counter. I've been requested to display this poster. As she turned the poster so Megan could get a full view, her face reflected the sadness. Megan read the poster, which requested men age 18 to 40 to sign up for the new Confederate Army. I don't know how long I can keep from nailing it up. No one knows I have it yet. Liz and Megan's face registered the seriousness of what they were facing, as well as the rest of the families in the state of Texas and throughout the nation. Does the paper give us any glimmer of hope? Megan asked again as they scanned the words on the newspaper page. Another headline read, George Williamson addresses the Texas Secession Convention, and another said, the Confederate Constitution. Well, here it is in black and white. You can read as many papers as you wish. Liz patted the stack of winter papers from other areas. Every paper, north or south, basically reported the same news. I think shots will be fired before it's all over. How bad or how long, only time will tell. When will you put the poster? When will you put up the poster for the soldiers to enlist? Asked Megan. Her thoughts still haunted her. Not until I have to, Liz said, and looked out the window of her mercantile. But it might be sooner than we think. The two sisters saw their husbands under the roof of the boardwalk in front of Samuel's office. They looked serious as they talked for several minutes. Oh, don't worry. I see them talk every day, and every conversation is serious, Megan said, consoling herself as well as her sister. No one has much laughter this winter, just talk of succession and rumors of war. Now with Jackson as the sheriff in town every day, he and Samuel spend much time together. How are you with that? Liz asked Megan, knowing she didn't want him to take the job, but liked having him in town and not out at the ranch. Oh, I love having him in my daily life. I don't like the thought of the others so much. At least Main Street and over the hill hasn't presented too much trouble yet. Mostly the cowboys are tired and hungry. They have to move on pretty quickly. The herd bosses don't let them linger too long. Just knowing that the city now has a lawman has settled them down some. You know the lady who does laundry? I think they came from the wagon train over a year ago, Liz mentioned. Yes, Megan said. She has a daughter named Sally. Abby said she is one of her students and a smart little girl. Liz nodded in agreement with her sister. Tex told me back at Christmas that her husband was shot in one of the gambling halls. Maybe just as well, Megan sighed. I think he beat her and drank away the little bit of money they had, but I still feel sorry for her. It can't be easy. I know, Liz replied. Hers is a sad story. I did get some mattresses sold for her. I hope it helped some. Samuel and Jackson made their way across the street and up the steps to the red doors of Liz's mercantile. Samuel looked at both women and nodded. Hello. Liz, have you received a government poster? Megan looked at Liz to see what she would say. Yes, she stammered. I received official mail, often. What are you looking for? Jackson spoke up next. Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. Lee is removing his 2nd Cavalry troops from Texas and going east to the Confederacy to manage the War Department for President Davis. He has issued posters to be displayed in the towns to start an enlistment for the cavalry troops and foot soldiers. Liz placed the poster on the counter and stood very somber, thinking for a moment, and then asked a question. Wasn't Jefferson Davis the head of the War Department for the Union, and General Lee the head of West Point, our military academy? Yes, they were, Jackson smiled with pride. With them leading up this conflict, the North better think twice before battling with the Confederacy. Lee and Davis are good friends, and both have military minds. I believe they might be the best there is. With these two in charge, this should be a quick rebuttal. Lincoln will see it our way real soon, Jackson stated with confidence. Thank you, Samuel said as he looked them over. Put one up in here, and we'll post the rest up around town. Here are the official enlistment papers. They can get them from you, Jackson, or me. I'll have the master list at my office. No uniforms as of yet, but they are coming. Any questions the soldiers have, send them over to me or Jackson. Jackson came around the corner to hug Megan and kiss the sleeping Lydia in her arms. He then followed Samuel out the door. Samuel looked back at Liz and nodded at her, trying to reassure her that she had no control over putting up the posters around town. The bell on the door jingled as he and Jackson walked out with a hammer and nails in their hands. Luke loved riding for the Pony Express. With the election of President Abraham Lincoln, the succession of the Southern states, and the birth of the Confederacy, the news he carried west was of monumental importance. Today, as he pushed his pony past magnificent views of snow-capped mountains and lush spring-green valleys fed by the nutrition of the snow melting in the warmth of the spring sun, Luke felt more alive and grateful than ever before. Whether he was maturing from being on his own in God's glorious creation or from understanding the magnitude of the Union ripping apart, he didn't know. But he would never be that naive boy again who began riding a year ago for the Overland Pony Express. He understood what was in his mochila. He knew what would happen when California received the news of the inaugural address, the State of the Union, with more states succeeding each passing day in the standoff at Fort Sumter, South Carolina. A call had been extended to California to join the Union's fight to bring their gold and wealth and their pioneer spirit to the side of the North and rally with their men to become Union soldiers. Luke pressed closer to the neck of his agile mare and held on as he ducked under some branches, for the horse knew the path. He raced better than or as well as Luke did. Her hoofs clicked on some smooth stones, pounding into the earth as they galloped on. What a wonderful world God has given us, Luke thought. He breathed in a deep breath of pine and spring flowers. His horse jumped a sparkling clear creek and quickly continued along the way. After months of traveling the path, both horse and rider knew the way without much thought. How could a war be what God wanted? Luke contemplated. He had seen the death and destruction that Indian raids had done to both tribe and cavalry. Neither were the victor. How can this be any different than what was about to happen? Luke had mixed thoughts on carrying the news that would precipitate a war. Bound to his oath and duty, he rode steadily on. Each day, with each ride, Luke saw the telegraph poles being erected and knew that when they were completed, news could travel west within hours. The Pony Express would no longer be needed to carry the news. Trains and railroad tracks were already in Nebraska territory, just waiting to push west with goods and people. Luke realized more than ever that the days he had grown up with were soon to be lost in the past. This year of riding for the Pony Express was the most important one of his life, and he would never forget it. Soon Luke would have to decide if he would fight for his southern states or hide out in the mountains until the storm of war had passed. How can I let my Texas family and friends wear a uniform for the Confederacy without me? How can I fight against them? Luke would be glad when this conflict was over. All of his life it had loomed over him. His grandfather Lucas had preached on it all the days he could remember as a youth. Luke had thought it would never come, and now he rode with the news beneath him. Lost in his thoughts, Luke had covered the miles quickly, and his pony stopped abruptly at the next station. News was passed by the station workers as riders went to and fro. "Today," Cliff said as he jumped down and held the fresh horse till the next rider could be on his way. "Just got news from the boss that wages will be delayed. The government still hasn't given the contract to us, so we can't be paid. And Mr. Majors, Mr. Russell, and Mr. Waddell are running low on funds. Keeping this going for over a year with no government money to support or pay wages has been tough. They are trying to last, knowing that what they do is important in these times. I figure the war or telegraph lines and railroad will shut us down anyway. It's been a good ride for a long while anyway." Luke knew the government contract to pay wages was important, but he didn't like the no paycheck that week, though he had made plenty. "I heard that Butterfield Stage was moving out of Texas since they succeeded. Wonder how that will affect the mail." "I don't know, but news is happening so fast with changes of all kinds around us. They are calling for soldiers in the South. Are you going to join? Our days are numbered here as it is." He paused and spit out a chaw of tobacco. "Texas voted 166-7 to succeed. Even old President John Tyler went to Washington to try to help work out a desperate compromise to save the Union. At least that's what the newspaper said." Luke was surprised to hear that the mountain man could read. Cliff continued, "Tyler said the eyes of the whole country are turned to this assembly in expectation and hope." Luke stood silent, thinking on the news he had just heard. He realized he would need to make a decision soon, and sooner than he had originally thought. "Luke," his friend and boss asked again. "Well, I'm not sure yet what my Texas family is thinking on. What about you?" "Me? Well, I was a fur trapper in these mountains before they convinced me to turn my cabin into a station for this operation, so I think I might just wait it out here. I don't like fighting Indians or government. Don't make me a coward or anything. I just don't have a stake in it. I'm not going to fight for a rich Southerner or a black man to be free, or stand with an Irish immigrant in a Union blue who happens to want a paycheck and doesn't have a clue about why he's fighting." Luke could tell his friend had been thinking about the matter and was informed on the issues. "Well, I just might tag along with you till the last cannon's fired." The words were spoken, twisted in his gut, and didn't settle well. At that moment, he knew he would have to stand with his family and do what they did. Chapter 29. Any updates on the state of our country? Thomas asked Samuel as he pulled out his chair and sat down at the dinner table. Everyone in the family had gathered at the evening meal. This spring weather was balmy and pleasant, so the little girls were eating on the porch with the door open. Their giggles floated in to where the adults sat to eat. We all want the news, Liz said as she looked up at Thomas, but let's pray first. We need his guidance more now than ever before. Liz, you're so right. Thomas patted her hand. Let's pray. The family bowed their heads to give thanks and ask for wisdom for them and the nation. When the prayer was finished, Liz looked at Samuel. Okay, now, you can tell us what you know, but we aren't going to spend all of our time at the table with this talk. Samuel smiled at Liz. Yes, ma'am, he responded graciously. I'm sad to report that Governor Sam Houston has resigned after Texas became the 7th state to submit succession papers to Congress. He was loyal to our great state, but also to the Union. The thought of a civil war bothers him greatly. He won't join either side, as no good will come from any of this. The governor said that Edward Clark is now the governor. In fact, he was already moved into the mansion in Austin. The others ate slowly as they listened. Jackson and Megan, Liz and Thomas, Abby and Emma, along with Tex, were all at their supper table that evening. Lydia, just a year old, sat with the grown-ups. She smiled and babbled as she ate. Montgomery, Alabama is currently the Confederate capital, but talk is it will move to Richmond, Virginia at any time. Part of Virginia has separated off and is now West Virginia. 4 more states have joined the Confederacy, and 4 slave states have stayed with the Union. Much pressure was applied on them as well. They are divided among their loyalties, but Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, and Missouri voted to stay Union. Samuel stated with a shake of his head. Tex wasn't the only one that had a hard time with this decision. Samuel took a bite of food on his plate as the conversation paused. The disbanded Rangers are joining forces again to keep the peace in Texas now that the Union forces are gone and Robert E. Lee has left to lead the Confederate Army. Tex added to what Samuel had shared. He looked at Jackson and said, Jackson, we will keep you on here in Fort Worth. You can be close to your family, and it will be good to have your experience here in this vital time. You know everyone and are respected. We can trust you. We might have to deal with Northern spies. Liz kept her eyes and ears open at the mercantile. Liz, keep your eyes and ears open at the mercantile. They haven't forgotten about the Texas cotton crop for their northern factories. Cotton will now be ferried south on the Rio Grande. Emma, you too can receive information in your eating establishment. You too could play a vital role for Texas. Emma looked at Tex in surprise and listened. A spy? She would be on the lookout, and nodded at Tex. Of course, Liz nodded. Just thinking about being aware of her surroundings and watchful of any trouble was what she usually did anyway. Are you Confederate men signing up yet? Abby asked. Yes and no, Tex said. We have a list started, and the posters are up. The Texas men were told they would be contacted as needed. Lincoln has asked for a 90-day enlistment of the Union troops. The Southern men started converging so quickly it scared them some. I'm sure Texas will start any time, although they want Texas to defend Texas and the supplies for the South. This far west, we can hold it securely from the north and continue to grow cotton, plus supply cattle for the Confederacy. They need our well, cotton, and cattle, Tex added. Watch for rustlers, Thomas. The reality of war and the part Texas would play was rapidly becoming clearer to them. For a brief moment in time, the women felt more secure as their men would remain in their state, closer to home. The North thinks we are simply farmers and ranchers, friendly and hospitable people, and we are, but we must watch for the wolf among us. With those words of caution from Samuel, the conversation turned to crops and cattle. Liz looked at the other women sitting at the table and smiled in relief. No guns and cannons would be rolling into town or men riding away from town, never to return. Not yet, anyway. And that concludes our reading for today. We'll start in on our next 4 o'clock story time with chapter 30 and Summer of 1861 on page 208. I hope you've enjoyed our story, learned a little bit about some Texas history, and maybe a few things about the Civil War that you didn't know. The research on how the war began really opened my eyes up to a lot of different issues that I don't think are covered necessarily in our quick studies in school. So if you have any questions, just send us an email. And if you're looking for the books, you can go to squareandasquare.com to order yours. The new book, Threads of Hope, is in process. We don't have a date yet, but I'll be able to be working on it more as our 4 o'clock story time is going to be coming to a close. And we have one more to finish this book. And then I'll be working on the Threads of Hope. I'll miss you guys at 4 o'clock story time, but I think we've had a really good time. I'll see you soon for the very last part of our book, Threads of Courage.